What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Every new generation brings us new Pokemon, new characters, and even new moves. But one of my favorite parts of Pokemon that often gets overlooked are the abilities. And it's no surprise that we've gotten a bunch with this latest crop. So let's talk about it. I mean, it is kind of my thing to talk about new abilities when a new game comes out. However, not all of them are noteworthy, and not all of them are even good, so I thought it would be prudent to do a compare and contrast. So here are the top 6 best, and worst, new abilities from Generation 9 of Pokemon. Number 6 worst, Wind Power. So starting off, we have Wind Power, which is not horribly atrocious, but it is very niche. See, this ability makes it so that whenever the Pokemon is hit with a wind-based move, it boosts the power of the next electric-type attack they use. So, I see some problems already. Firstly, it doesn't charge up your attack stat, just specific electric moves, and only for one whole turn, not the rest of the battle. So this is basically just a worse version of Bellibolt's new ability that was already narrowed in focus. But secondly, what exactly are wind-based moves anyway? It's not even any flying-type move, just wind ones. Is this a new subcategory of attacks that was just carved out in Gen 9? Because it's not even what you would expect. Obvious inclusions like Razor Wind and Ominous Wind don't count towards this ability, despite the Wind moniker still being in their Japanese names. So it seems purely arbitrary, leaving only about a dozen moves in the entire game that could even activate this ability, with most of them being resisted by electric types anyway, making it even less likely that anyone would use a wind attack to boost your electric power. So it's a limited effect from an already limited pool of activation that's not likely to benefit anyone. Number 6 best, Wind Rider. On the other hand, the wind mechanic may not be all bad, since there's another new ability that utilizes it as well, this time being Wind Rider, and this time the Pokemon's attack stat does get raised when hit with a wind-based move, or Tailwind, which is already much better than a single kind of attack, but it's even better because Wind Rider actually prevents any damage from being taken by wind attacks at all. And immunity, even one that is so niche, is always helpful. But it's all the better when you factor in that Grass-type Pokemon get this wind-riding power, being in a perfect position to get the most out of this ability. Unlike electric types who resist the largely flying wind moves, a grass type becoming immune to that, plus the ice and even fire moves that are included is a much bigger plus. So the Pokemon with Wind Rider definitely got the better end of this deal. Number 5 worst, Well-Baked Body. I'm not saying this ability isn't entertaining. A bred Pokemon becoming affected by getting baked is funny and makes sense, but this ability is just a little too weird. I mean, as I said, immunities are very useful, and Well-Baked Body makes the Pokemon undamaged by fire-type moves, and instead gets its defense boosted. So that is nice. But does it really make sense on a Fido evolution? I mean, the fire-type already resists Fairy, so you're not likely to be using this dog against those Pokemon anyway, and the side effects of the ability are okay, but we all know that the most common fire-type attacks are special in nature, so raising your physical defense won't do all that much, so the buffs aren't really likely to matter at all. Plus, you can bake bread for too long and burn it. It doesn't just become immune to more heat, so I don't think that the science backs this up. And really, there's no way for this to ever show up on another Pokemon, unless they're just planning on opening up a whole bakery of new monsters. Number 5 best, Armor Tail. It's kind of weird that we're getting new evolutions to older Pokemon in an odd-numbered generation, but I won't complain. The first one they showed off, of course, being Farigiraf, who got its own new signature ability, Armor Tail. This ability takes the new tail helmet thing that it's wearing and makes it impossible for anyone to use priority moves against it, or any of its allies that it may have. That's about it. I mean, I don't think this two-headed giraffe had any particular susceptibility to priority moves that would be a huge problem, but whenever you can cut off a fast Pokemon from becoming even faster, it's always satisfying. Plus, it takes away a bunch more moves than any pool that we've seen so far, even blocking some status moves from affecting Farigiraf, so this Pokemon may be weird, but at least it'll keep everyone fair at an even speed. Number 4 worst, Greninja. Okay, so I gotta explain a bit, but each generation makes certain tweaks to the games that came before them, like buffing a Pokemon's stats upon transfer, and even changing abilities like how Mimikyu does now get hurt when its disguise breaks. And this time, the most drastic changes seem to almost exclusively be centered on Greninja. See, it wasn't enough to alter one of its abilities, they had to meddle with both Protean and Battle Bond. Battle Bond no longer changes forms into Ash Greninja, which begs the question, why did they even bother putting it in the game if they were just gonna take it right back out? But that's just a cosmetic change. The real blow comes from the fact that now the stat boosts only apply to the first turn after you take down a target, leaving an extremely narrow window to even have this ability. But then hey, maybe you prefer to use Protean, except it also received the same limitations, only activating on the first turn, which means that you can change your type once and that's it. No more abusing constant type loops, you're gonna have to choose one type for the situation and stick with it. So this is a pretty big setback for this French frog, but he's never really been a favorite of mine, so that's kind of okay with me. Number 4 best, Thermal Exchange. This isn't a great name, maybe, but the effect is alright, since this ability makes it so that every time a Pokemon is hit with a Fire-type move, their attack gets raised. Now, it doesn't say that it's an immunity to fire, so it could be more useful, I guess. However, Thermal Exchange does provide an immunity from being burned. That's almost just as good, since getting a burn would just negate those attack boosts that you were getting. So now if somebody tries hoping for a burn, they'll get nothing but making you stronger. And this is extra appreciated when the attack stat of the Pokemon with this ability is already the highest that they've got. Plus, it's not like they're weak to fire, only being neutral, so it's maybe not the most overpowered ability out there, but it is certainly only going to be a gain for your Pokemon, and maybe even make the difference in victory throughout your journey. Number 3 worst, Mycelium Might. With a name like this, you might think that this ability would be applicable to all mushroom Pokemon, and perhaps it will be at some point, but maybe not, because it also seems like it's kind of a detriment. See, this ability relates to status moves in that they will ignore the opponent's ability, but also make you guaranteed to go last. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard, but speed is kind of important in Pokemon, and sure, most mushrooms aren't gonna be super fast, but ensuring that you go last isn't great, and the payoff is far too specific. Granted, there are plenty of abilities that do block status effects, like the one that we just mentioned, preventing burns, or even the new Purifying Salt as well. So getting around those is nice, but those are far from the only way to block status moves. What if somebody uses the move Uproar? Sure, you could have gotten around their Insomnia ability, but now they can't be put to sleep anyway. What if they're just an electric type that can't be paralyzed at all? None of that is worth going last every single time you try. It might have been worthwhile if it ensured every status move would be 100% accurate, since that would actually be a trade-off of good and bad, but now it just seems like a blight on all of the fungus Pokemon. Number 3 best, Opportunist. One way to win Pokemon battles is to sit there sponging hits while you boost your stats until they won't go any higher, and then you just attack 6 times to obliterate their team. This is only slightly better than Toxic Stalling, but still doesn't seem all that fun of a way to play. So imagine then that you get to do the same thing, but without any of the effort. That's the ability Opportunist. Here the Pokemon will see the opponent's stat increases and say, yeah, that looks pretty cool, I'll do that too. And it gets an identical boost. Sometimes it's random, like if a wild Meditite uses Workup or something, but just imagine if a trainer that you were battling got all their stats raised after using Ancient Power, only for you to get them all for free. Or even better, imagine if they used a Shell Smash and then you got the boosts but not the defense drops. That means that they are in so much trouble from your boosted attack and speed that they caused. All I'm saying is Opportunist might be enough to have certain people rethink their entire strategies for victory when it gets mirrored right back in their face. Number 2 worst, Seed Sower. Not much to say on this one. Seed Sower makes it so that when the Pokemon is hit, they bring up grassy terrain. That's it. I was skeptical last gen when Sandaconda did this with a Sandstorm, but at least that one would punish your enemies by getting some chip damage. Grassy terrain does the opposite and heals every turn. Sure, it does heal you too, but that's assuming that you survived the hit instead of rewarding the foe with health for knocking you out. It's not that this ability is an outright hindrance like Slow Start or something, but at best it's a draw, meaning that you might as well not even activate it, and it is way too easy to backfire and help your opponent. So maybe in the future Pokemon with Seed Sower should be a little more careful about letting those seeds fall in just any old place. Number 2 best, Toxic Debris. Look, I don't really care for the Pokemon that got this ability, but I gotta admit that they won out on the lottery. This one performs exactly like the one we were just mentioning, but instead of spewing out grassy terrain, it releases toxic spikes. That's way better than healing your enemy. Granted, it's not exactly useful in a wild battle that's a one and done, but any trainer battle or real-life player that you go against will have to deal with the floor suddenly becoming poisonous, kicking themselves that they chose not to put that Grafaiai on their team to absorb them. For the amount of time that people take setting up hazards like this, I can only imagine that Pokemon with toxic debris will be abused quite heavily. And now it seems like only a matter of time for Stealth Rocks to have such treatment, but maybe regular spikes would be a better place to start. Number 1 worst, Lingering Aroma. With how popular Lechonk was before Gen 9 came out, maybe we should have known that its evolution would get a signature ability, but why did it have to be this one? I know this little piggy has a whole thing about its smell being so strong, but then couldn't it have gotten something else like Aroma Veil or some other ability? And I don't even like Aroma Veil. All Lingering Aroma does is that when the Pokemon is touched by any other, their ability will now become Lingering Aroma 2. That's right, they used a couple of pigs to rip off the Mummy ability, not to mention Wandering Spirit. Ripping off that ability once was suspect, but allowable because it was a direct relative of Cofagrigus, but why did they make a third ability that does the exact same thing? Sure, it's not like Mummy would have fit on a nice-smelling pig, but the one that they made isn't any more inclusive. It's just as likely to remain solely on this Pokemon. So if there's clearly such interest in abilities like this, why do they keep making them so constricted in scope? I know that there are other worse abilities that have been created out there, but taking away someone else's ability is just not nearly as useful on a random perfumed pig as it is on a highly defensive ghost Pokemon. Number 1 best, Earth Eater. You might not agree that this is the best the Paldea region has to offer, but to me, this is utter genius. I have never heard a single bad word ever said against the likes of Volt Absorb or Water Absorb. Well, unless it's because someone was caught off guard by it in battle. But everybody loves regaining HP, and that's what Earth Eater does, but this time it's for the ground type. Now, I know the ground type already has a bunch of immunities against it, but I can't get mad at the mental image of this Pokemon feeling totally replenished after a big hearty meal of soil. This is so much better to me than other abilities like, say, Sap Sipper. While yes, they also provide an immunity, most Pokemon are able to learn multiple moves that could boost their stats in a similar way. However, not every Pokemon is so blessed when it comes to healing capabilities. So even if it is out of your control, the chance at free health is pretty nice. And even nicer here because ground is such a common offensive typing. The only real downside is that the name might be a little specific and keep it from being too widespread, but I could still see it getting a lot wider distribution in the future, and let you get taken back to full health every time you switch in on an earthquake. And of course with this ability it seems like only a matter of time before we get one of these for every type that exists. So those are the top 6 best and worst new abilities to come out of Generation 9 of Pokemon. There are of course many more that they created, so let me know the standout Paldean ability to you down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.